loud. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session, which is called Hacking the Newsroom. My name is Filippo Di Salvo. I'm a researcher. I work for the European Journalism Observatory. And in Italy, I'm a freelance journalist, and I mainly write for the Italian Wired. I have the pleasure to moderate today this panel about hackers in the newsrooms and the way that hackers are impacting on journalism at large, on journalistic culture, on journalistic practices. And I'm here today with a bunch of excellent and extremely talented speakers today. Let me just introduce them briefly. We have Claudio Guarnieri here at my left. He's an hacker, he's a researcher at the Citizen Lab in Toronto. He's also a fellow at the Center for Internet and Human Rights. And when it comes to journalism, he has been contributing with, among others, Der Spiegel and The Intercept during the explosion of the Snowden revelation. Then we have Silke Grunwald here. She's a data journalist from Switzerland. She is the editor and the lead of the data newsroom at SRF, which is the Swiss public broadcaster. She's also the chairwoman of the Journalist Fund and the founder of the website lobbywatch.ch. Then we have Linda Sandvik here on my right. She is a creative technologist. She's a freelancer interface developer. In 2015, she has been working at The Guardian as the Knight Mozilla Fellow. Then we have Basil Simon. She is a self-defined hack journalist. She works for the BBC News Lab and is also a data journalist for Highways, which is a project he launched. So, as I was saying today, we're going to talk about how hackers are taking a place into journalism, and we could start from this statement that comes from the most quoted picture at journalistic conferences, that everybody needs a hacker right now to do many things, and today we are going to discuss about some of this in different fields. I've put together here some quotes about what and who hacker are. The first one is from Gabriella Coleman. She defines hackers as programmers who share an ethic which is done by experimentation and play with a very pro-social interest and information liberation. And a very classic quote from Stephen Levy, one of the most prominent researcher and authors about hacking culture and ethics. He defines hacker as people who regard computing as the most important thing in the world. So we are not going to talk about people who stole your credit card on the internet, and I guess no one here had this doubt. And this is another boring academic slide from the state of the art of the research about hacking and journalism. And we could start from this bullet points here saying that the impact of hacking in journalism could be in transparency, in making journalism more transparent with a clearer ethical version of information. Journalists are thinking in the way that by having this common ground of cultures between journalists and hackers, we could have a better journalism, which is more playful, remixed, experimenting with, again, this pro-social interest. And then it's, in opinion of researchers, making journalism more as a process rather than a product. This is a common quote from the network journalist principles, and we're going to see how this is developing again. And it's also definitely helping in making journalism more a distributed participation playground where different cultures are working together and contributing to each other. So when it comes to coding and programming and informatics into journalism, I think the debate so far has been limited to one question that different observers and researchers have been coping with, which is, should all journalists learn to code? And the question is not yet got an answer, and I think we should move forward to this. We already have people who are more than able to code, and we could maybe analyze this again. And so far, hacking has met with journalism in different fields. The most used and frequently applied are data journalism, where coders and hackers are providing apps to analyze and visualize data results. Then we have digital security when it comes to encryption for sources protection and journalist protection as well. There are several examples of how hackers are helping journalists in these regards, and the Italian project GlobalX is one of the most interesting in this sense. And then hackers are building tools for journalists when it comes to engineering. The Washington Post has hired dozens of hackers to make their systems work better. But I think, and we will gonna through this, that hacking in journalism could help in many, many, many other fields, and I hope that we are gonna discuss some of them. This is how the Panama Papers were published together with a bunch of journalists and hackers again. So we see how this relationship is making journalism different exactly in these days, and how these two fields are operating together. Before I leave the mic to our speakers, these are kind of the questions we will try to answer this afternoon here. So what has been the impact of hacking on the journalistic culture? Are there some best practice that we could already identify? And are there other trading zones where hackers and journalists could meet in order to work together? And I think we can start with Basil, who is going to present some of the work that the BBC News Lab is working on these days. Full screen, here we go. Not really.
Cheers, can I actually reach that? Again? Can you put it full screen or something? So, hi everyone, my name is Basil. I work at BBC News Labs. I've been working there for 2 years, sort of hacker journalist in between, a journalist and a developer. I co-founded airwas.org, which is a big investigation around Iraq and Syria. And there, now I manage the data and the friendly Russian DDoS attacks that they like to send us. We started that a year and a half ago. And a year ago, we started with Elliot Bentley from Wall Street Journal and some FT people, the Journal Coders Meetup, which name is pretty much self-explanatory. So we bring together journalism students, journalists, or journalist-minded techies to work together, work their way through a tutorial together. I'm going to speak more specifically about News Labs. The mission we have is very simple: driving innovation in news, promote what we do and what could be done with computers in the newsroom and in such a big organization as the BBC. The way we do this is fairly simple. We just brainstorm a lot, think about what we could do, stay open, stay creative. I like that GIF. And after that prototype, just build it, test your assumptions, put it in front of people, whether that's a select subtract of journalist or a select subtract from your audience. Try to refine, throw it away, or try to transfer it to some people who can actually write production code and put your thing in front of millions of people. Also, the way we do this, the composition, I will talk about a bit more later, but the way the team is structured is quite important, as well as our interaction with the larger business, the industry, and the wider BBC, and also trying not to be isolated in a separate building, which is the case at the moment, but try to essentially talk to people, because that's all about people, that's all about cooperation and sharing. I'm going to give you a brief overview of some projects we work on or I've worked on. The first one is NewsHack, that's sort of outreach project. So there's been a bunch of them. Some of them are targeted towards universities. So we go to computer science department, human-centered systems, people, computational journalism masters in Cardiff, journalism degrees. We go to these universities with either a challenge or just a day or 2 days hack, see what comes out of it. Some of them are oriented towards the BBC itself, so they're fairly internal, so that's how we come up with new stuff we're going to put forward when an election happens, for example. That's going to be the case in May in the UK. And some of them, as NewsHack 8 on the slide, was angled towards the wider industry, so we had lots of partners from lots of different media organizations. And the result of this one was actually a project we are leading, and that puts together the BBC and the Times, they're often seen as competitors. We're working together on this project, as well as Goldsmiths University. And the tool itself, just a quick word about it, is a sort of online portal with all data-related, data journalism-related tools, software, or techniques you could be using, and that's angled towards helping the business and the industry itself. Other project I could say a word of, that's Twitter Archive. This aims to prevent things disappearing from the public record, particularly when it comes to MPs and people who hold public office. I strongly believe that some people should not be able to get away with deleting stuff from the public record. This is a screenshot from the Elasticsearch cluster that gives you a result of all the tweets that appeared just hours before the attacks in Brussels, and that's a subtract of users that are, alleged British jihadis, either in Syria or formerly in Syria. And that we take these tweets, take screenshots of them, archive them, put that in an Elasticsearch cluster. You can search through that and then give back to your journalist. And that's fairly useful. BBC Westminster, so the whole politics stuff, is quite interested in that. Last project I want to say a word about is Moulinet. It's a French word. Why not? And that's an aim to solve a problem we have. Shape files to create maps are quite hard to work with when you're not fairly technical, if you don't want to learn GIS. But there's another way. You can use a base layer provided by Mapbox, Google Maps, whatever you fancy, and then abstract the data to another layer that people can actually interact with. And in that example, that's Google Spreadsheets. So Moulinet is just a simple pipeline between all that. So the data journalism department creates a template, for example, a map of London or a map of Iraq in a particular case, and then just gives a spreadsheet to a journalist. And that person is just going to put his data or her data in there, and the pipeline will do the rest. And what we will end up with is a simple map with basic features already in for you. Before I wrap up, composition of a team. So we have different roles. Some of us are developers, journalists, software engineers, data scientists, bioinformaticians for some of us. We have different backgrounds, whether that's law for myself, computer science for others. There's a PhD in epigenetics here for some reason. We have different origins. We come from all around the world, and that's mostly Europe, Asia, and North America. And we also have different statuses. Some of us are staff, contractors, freelancers, on attachment, on secondment, on lease, doing hot shoe. And the goal of that is you can cross-pollinate across the organization, because people come and go and they stay your friends after that. So that leads to an extended family of colleagues and friends that we can sort of summon when something happens. In total, we should be sort of 10 people that constitute the core of News Labs. And if you take the whole family, you arrive at 40, 50 people with whom we worked on a very regular basis again. As important as who we are, who we're not, clearly not unicorns, or maybe some of us to a certain extent, but unicorns don't exist. That department does exist. We're real people, and just the secret, and I hope we're going to talk more about that, is just to work together and combine the skills, share the knowledge between all of us, and help each other. And that's me.
Thank you, Basil, for your presentation. We are now moving with Linda, so if you could start the slides from the MacBook, please.
So, hi, I'm Linda. My background is in civic tech, so I used to work for local government, and I also did a education startup called Code Club, which is a volunteer network of teaching kids how to code, basically, in after-school clubs. And last year, I was a Knight Mozilla Fellow at The Guardian. And Knight Mozilla Open News is this cool thing where they take technologists and they place them in newsrooms all over the world. So interestingly, what you said about the Twitter archive, for instance, I think that was the first thing I was asked to make when I came to The Guardian. And probably this sort of thing is being made in all of the newsrooms all over the world that needs it. And Open News really believes that we should open source our code and share all of that. And we can compete on stories, not on technology. So all of the things that we make as Open News Fellows are open source and can be used by anyone. But the thing that I wanted to talk to you about today is news games, because I feel that that is something that has been missing from this conference. And I even went to disruptive storytelling this morning, and I was very disappointed that there were no games mentioned. Because I do think that this is the future of storytelling, and that we can, save journalism and all that. So one of the things I did when I was a fellow at The Guardian is I started this News Games Club. And it's just like regular meetup where I get journalists and game designers and technologists, programmers, graphic designers, all kinds of people together to talk about how we can make news games. And I wanted people, especially journalists, to understand that you don't have to do this on your own. Like, you don't need to know all of these things. You can actually collaborate with other people that know how to do the coding or the graphics or the game design. And yeah, my aim is just that there should be more news games happening around the world. And I mean, you might think that your competition is The Guardian or the New York Times or some other news organization, but I think that your competition is mobile phone games like Bejeweled or Words with Friends. That's what people are spending time on. They want to be entertained. And as soon as we can learn to embrace the fact that news is entertainment, the better. I mean, we can try to deny it for a little longer, but eventually we're gonna get there. And despite despite what you might have heard about who plays games, I just wanted to say that everyone plays games. Absolutely everyone plays games. So when I was at this disruptive storytelling session earlier today, one of the speaker from the New York Times said that they have a problem with retention. So people read so many articles a day, they don't remember it the next day. And they wanted to make their articles more memorable. And a way for them to do this was using quizzes. And I mean, I don't know about you. Maybe you dream of being examined on absolutely everything that you read, like you're back in school or something, but that's not for me. And, by all means, you try to make it more memorable, but you can do it in a fun way. It doesn't have to be a quiz. I think that we can go beyond quizzes and start making games. And when you are playing a game and you are making the actions, you are much, much more likely to remember it. So this is my favorite news game of all times. It's from Wired. It's called Cutthroat Capitalism. You are a pirate in the Gulf of Aden, and you have to basically capture a ship. So you got $50,000 from your tribe leaders and other investors. You have a boat, a little boat, and you have a crew. And all these dots on the map, they are boats that you can attack. Once you manage to board one of those ships, you have to start negotiating. You have to look after your hostages, and you can do things like feed them or threaten them, beat them, whatever you think is necessary to get your ransom. And when I started playing this game, I thought, okay, the strategy for winning this game is gonna be, I'm gonna wait for the biggest Maersk ship that has all of the, billions, or Maersk is a really, really big company with a lot of money behind it. I'm gonna, take hostage some white people, and Maersk is gonna have to pay me. But actually negotiating is really, really hard. There's a lot of things that can go wrong while you're negotiating. And after a while, I realized that whereas maybe Maersk has the most money, all life is worth something. So if you just attack any old ship, like just the nearest one, you can attack a lot more ships, and you can ask for a quite low ransom, they're gonna pay it. If you're just asking for like $50,000, $100,000, they're gonna give it to you just to make you go away, to save their people. If you're asking for $2 million, it's gonna be a lot harder. So I learned a lot about the rise of piracy and why there was such a rise in piracy in Somalia. It's because it is so profitable to attack a lot of ships. And I still remember that. And this game was made in 2009. And it's also kind of sad that my favorite news game was made in 2009. And there hasn't really been any good ones after that. My favorite one from last year is a Bloomberg news game where it's a very simple game. It works on mobile as well, so if you want to start playing it now, like, I don't blame you, just do it, it's fun. Try to beat me, it's gonna be hard, because I'm currently number 4 in the world. So this is a very simple game about buying and selling stocks. You press and hold to buy a stock, and you let go to sell the stock. It's so easy, you can do it on a mobile. Like, you just press and hold, like, it's so simple. And it's also a really good example about how games are just social and shareable from the start. So I don't know if you can see that in the corner there, but it just says, like, you outperformed 99.7%. You know, tweet that. Of course I'm gonna brag about myself. Obviously I will tweet about this. Like, I don't normally tweet about, like, Bloomberg stock articles, but I'm sure as hell I'm gonna brag about myself. And then they even give you a unique URL so that you can challenge others to beat you, and then they know which score you got. So, oh yeah, I made like 1,900% return. Like, I should probably stop being a coder and go into stock trading. So one of the criticisms of news games is that games are fun and news is serious business, which I think is wrong. You can definitely make serious games. The Guardian made a very simple choose your own adventure game about Syrian refugees. You are a 28-year-old sunny woman, and you have to make a lot of hard decisions that is going to, you know, are you going to end up in Sweden, which is the dream, or are you going to end up in what is basically a really crappy refugee camp in Turkey? I mean, you can play this game and find out. And it's also a really good example of excellent photojournalism. And it's such a simple game. I'm not saying, I mean, a lot of journalism went into this. This was like a 7 months of research. But the game, the coding, the technology is really, really easy. It's just HTML and CSS. Like, anyone can make a choose your own adventure game. Which of course is why the BBC copied it. They also made the Syrian Tournament choose your own adventure game. It's basically you get 2 choices at the end of each passage. You choose one. Most of the time, though, you're going to end up dead in the Mediterranean, drowning, like so many of the refugees do. And again, this got a lot of criticism for making a game out of something that is people's lives. But I think that the real power of telling the story like this is that you actually get people to put themselves in the shoes of refugees, having to make the really hard decisions that refugees have to make. And then very often you end up dead. Of course, you can just start playing again and see if you make it to Sweden that time. And I also just wanted to say that games can be made about absolutely anything. So this is like a fairly boring story about how the UK porn legislation law, something got changed. There's a sex act, the government changed it, there were some changes. And somebody decided to make that into a news game, which is this excellent pornography for beginners. So instead of just like listing, here are the literal laws that were before, here are the changes, you can learn the changes. Where are you allowed to put this very pixelated penis? You're not allowed to put it everywhere, according to the new laws. I didn't include the link there, but I'm sure you can find it if you really want to. So yeah, that's it for now, for me.
Thank you, Linda. If we can go back to the central computer, I will. I will hand it to Claudio Guarnieri, who will talk us about his experience working with journalists as an hacker. The floor is yours.
All right. So hello, everybody. My name is Claudio. I've been navigating the internet for most part of my life, known as Next. I'm really not a journalist. I'm a security guy. I come from a hacking background. I've been around in hacking communities and doing various technical things for a good part of 10, 15 years now. I kind of stumbled in journalism by accident, basically. And occasionally I kind of engage in acts of journalism. But the reason being that probably to these days we can agree that society is becoming increasingly technological, and hackers kind of suddenly found themselves in a position of dealing with topics that became very mainstream. Or at least that's what happened in the last few years, at least with the Snowden revelations. So the reason why I said I kind of stumbled in journalism is that because generally I happen to know a lot of journalists, ironically, and mostly because I happen to get to meet these journalists when bad things happen. What I mostly do is work with the Citizen Lab. Citizen Lab is an interdisciplinary laboratory from the University of Toronto, and we do research kind of at the intersection between political science and information security and human rights and so on and so forth, which basically, in other words, mean working and researching and exposing whoever is messing with the internet to some degree. And within a lot of things, Citizen Lab has been around for a very long time. Some of the things that I've been most involved with deal with surveillance companies and surveillance industry in general. For instance, how many of you here have ever heard of Finn Fisher Hacking Team before? Because probably mostly Italians, I guess. So I'll get to that in a minute. But what we do in the Citizen Lab is come across something that happens, for instance, some journalists from some country, most cases living in countries that are not very democratic, are being targeted of some digital attacks, and then they got in contact with us. And then as a starting point, we start investigating further and see what happened, what is the background, who targeted them and for what reason. And there's been a bunch of lessons that I've learned over the years of doing these kinds of work. First being that journalists are increasingly becoming targets of digital attacks and surveillance of different kinds. I'm actually going to speak into details about this tomorrow. But that's a big part, at least has been the entry point for me to get to discover the journalism world. And what I've been learning through that process is that hackers do make great investigative journalists. I put journalists in between quotes because they don't necessarily know how to write properly. But they're definitely the ones that know how to find information, how to collect information when it's not easy to get it, and how to make it easily accessible. Other lessons that I've learned is, firstly, there's some stories that you can only get, or at least develop to a point of being in the public interest through the use of technical techniques, through the use of clever hacks. It's not obviously the majority of them, but you'd be surprised how many things you get actually to discover if you know where to look. And also that news stories are becoming increasingly technical. And that's especially the case for, again, surveillance as being a hot topic of the last couple of years. Maybe it's kind of decreasing now as an interest, but it's been all over the news for the last 2 or 3 years at least. And those were very deeply technical stories, and somehow it still happened that they got mainstream. And hackers definitely, at least technologists, I kind of use hacker in a very loose interpretation of the term. We could argue for hours what that actually means. But in that sense, as technologists had a great role in making those stories public and at least helping journalists understanding what was a pressing matter and whatnot. Some of the work we've done, for instance, with the Citizen Lab, as I mentioned, dealt with surveillance vendors. So at some point, as I mentioned, we got contacted by different journalists and activists in different countries. Most of the beginning, it was between 2011 and 2012, so it had to do mostly with journalists coming from countries that were kind of either fading out or at least still in the middle of the Arab Spring. And in that times, there was a lot of targeting, very increased use of digital ways to monitor and go after people that were controversial at that time, which meant pretty much everybody. And what we discovered is that European companies, most of the European companies had a part in that prosecution and surveillance of journalists and activists. If you've never heard of Finfisher Hacking Team, you probably heard of the last one at least from last year. These are companies that develop software and tools and systems to target whoever is the intended target with very sophisticated pieces of software that basically monitor everything you do with your computer or with your mobile device and so on. And we just happened to discover that they were involved in selling this kind of equipment to countries which were using them against journalists a lot. And we wanted to know more, so we started investigating we want to know who is using it. We come across just a few cases, but we wanted to know who is behind it. And the result of that work came into basically getting to the point of identifying a good amount of all of the customers of this company, basically almost exclusively through the means of technical research. So we kind of employed some creative ways to identifying installations of this software. This was Hacking Team distribution around the globe, and bear in mind that was 2014, so a year and a half before the company got hacked and all the emails and documents got spilled out. And the result after the hack actually that we were 100% accurate in our discovery. And some of these research and investigations we've done landed front pages on New York Times and Washington Post and so on, was still before the Snowden revelations at that point, or at least part of the work before the Snowden revelation. So surveillance was kind of not yet a hot topic as much as it was at that point. But yeah, through basically technical means, we managed to kind of build that whole investigative story out of it, which was, yes, deeply technical, but had a lot of political and human rights implications to it, and that's why it kind of got good media attention. We also got to the point of actually being able, again, with kind of creative technical ways to de-anonymize kind of anonymization chains that the companies employed to prevent their customers from getting identified in the first place. And that's just an example of that. There's been many others. Another example of this, I've done some work on NSA and GCHQ and Five Eyes capabilities in terms of surveillance. I mostly deal with targeted surveillance, so not mass surveillance, but going after specific groups or specific individuals and employing some more sophisticated techniques in doing so. And we learn a lot, obviously, through the Snowden documents. As I said, many of them were still very technical stories, but the ones that were not even technical left bits and pieces around in the documents or in the articles that suggested certain things. So for instance, there's been, at the very beginning at least, many articles that implied that NSA and GCHQ were active in targeting European institutions and European companies. One of the most famous one was Belgacom at that time, which is one of the biggest, probably, Belgian ISP, internet service provider. But there were no details about it. Like, we didn't know how they did it. We didn't know exactly who did it. The documents were quite vague. The articles didn't have probably enough material to go into in depth on it. And so we wanted to do more again. And we recurred to, again, employing some technical tips and tricks here and there. And we managed from starting exclusively from what we had in the public on the Belgacom hack to be able to reconstruct 10 years of malware operations and spying operations from NSA and GCHQ and their partners from 2003 up to 2013, 2014. And while that might appear as a very technical, thing in and of itself, we collected data and malware samples and these kinds of things for a long period of time, having that kind of technical evidence, while it's kind of pointless in itself for the public, could lead to identify more cases that do become in the public interest. For example, we found more evidence that certain companies or certain institutions got targeted, and when you have evidence, the story becomes more complete, besides actually potentially becoming legal evidence in case of legal proceedings. So what I was mentioning is, out of all of these things that I mentioned, at least up to this point, is that most of the work that we have done in this context, which turned out to be long investigative pieces that probably not everybody or most people actually didn't read in full, but the outcome of it is that we managed to identify news stories in data which was pretty much already out there. But it just needed the right expertise and the right look to actually find it and make use of it. And so that's what I mentioned. Hackers know how to find information by particular access to certain data sets that they might have access to because of their profession, or might it because they know, how to scrape certain websites and collect information out of these websites. And in this case, one great example, for instance, is Transparency Toolkit and IC Watch, which if you don't know, I really recommend going and look at them. So Transparency Toolkit, for instance, is a very small kind of group and organization collective of hackers that are devoting their time to build tools and infrastructure for aiding journalists and assisting journalists in developing stories and researching stories in depth. IC Watch is just one of the tools they developed. They basically managed to create a system to scrape the entirety of LinkedIn and extract all the details, all the profiles of people that have somehow to do with the intelligence community. And just digging through it, it's amazing the kind of things you can find. You can find out of, for example, top secret code names from the NSA of programs that have never been even published up to this point. You find people putting these code names in their LinkedIn profiles and saying, I worked on this program, because in the intelligence community they know what it is probably, but the public doesn't. And so that helps a lot reconstructing narratives and how these programs developed, who got involved into it, whether there were companies involved in developing these systems or not. And that's just an example. Other tools they're developing is general purpose scraping and indexing tools to collect data from open source sources and putting them in one place that makes it a lot easier to go through. And as I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes at least stories are deeply technical. As I said, the NSA documents were a primary example of that. Maybe at the beginning, it was slightly easier. It was a news story, and the biggest issues kind of came out quite quickly. So PRISM and X-Keyscore and these huge surveillance programs kind of came out at the very beginning, and it was impactful because it explained to the public very quickly what was the length through which Western countries were surveilling the internet. But all the following stories, at least a large majority of the following stories, were deeply technical. And it still managed to kind of keep up in the news for a couple of years. And that definitely wouldn't have happened without the contribution of technologists kind of getting in and analyzing material, extracting information that could have been generalized for the public from presentations, PowerPoint presentations, and documents which were very cryptic in their technical terms. And in that case, they wouldn't have otherwise been accessible to the public. Probably much still hasn't been published because it's too technical, although that's kind of my struggle that I have with journalistic practices and editorial structures and so on, which is that in fact there's many stories that are still to be written, many stories that are still need to be told, and perhaps the larger public is not the right audience for it, but the tech community, which is a huge community nowadays, tech industry is one of the biggest industry we have a huge interest in these stories. And one of the problems, for instance, is that we don't really have places or avenues to publish these kinds of information. We work with the Citizen Lab, which is a great organization to do technical research in the public interest to some degree, but it's still a university laboratory, so it abides to the inherent rules of it. And then the last point, which probably we'll perhaps discuss later, which is that as we see more and more leaks, being perhaps not Panama leaks is not the best example, but many examples that we come across in the last years. When we got source material, we really need people that know what they're doing when dealing with them. You really need people that understand operational security. You really need people that understand how to protect the sources when this information is being passed around over the internet, how to protect the journalists when doing these kinds of analysis and work, especially if it takes an extended period of time and they might become target of investigation and surveillance themselves. But also in the process of publishing documents, you need to have people understand, you need people that understand the formats of these documents, how they're structured, whether you could unintentionally leak information that you didn't intend to publish. For instance, there's been some documents, even from this Snowden material, that has been mistakenly redacted and put out in the open when people were still able to fetch the redacted content from it. So there's like these kinds of day-to-day journalistic practices for which hackers can help a great deal. And unfortunately, we don't see yet as many hackers employed in doing these kinds of things. And that's it for now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Claudia. We have now Silke, who will talk us about her experience in coordinating a team of journalists and hackers together. Bloody computers.
See, I'm not the hacker. I'm not the technologist. Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I would like to talk about hacks and hackers in the specific field of investigative journalism, and about the very strong and important power of communications. Initially, Philip, you had also introduced me as a senior editor and reporter. There you go. Thank you. For the Swiss Public Broadcaster. I built a team up there of data and document-driven journalists about 2 years ago, and before that I did the same with the Swiss daily newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung. And the one major goal I needed to achieve was actually to attract people like you, Claude, you hackers, to actually join a media house, to get employed full-time by a traditional media house like Neue Zürcher Zeitung, one of the oldest newspapers across Europe, and now with the Swiss Public Broadcaster. And a public broadcaster is not known for its most innovative ways of working, I guess, by all of you. So this is why I think talking about tools is the one thing. Tools can offer you solutions, but there is a very basic first step that you need to take, and that is done through communications. Recent projects that we released with the Swiss Public Broadcaster, so that you have an idea what we do, is we did an investigation in the $1 million business of migration. We did so together with a team behind the Migrants Files. We did contribute to an investigation in terms of corruption in Azerbaijan. We helped the network of OCCRP on the Swiss side because, surprise, surprise, there was a Swiss bank account involved. Panama leaks, I hear you. And one of the recent stuff that we did in terms of surveillance technology, we actually took the data dump that was leaked concerning the information of hacking team, and we actually got lucky and found a Swiss lead in this data dump. And all those stories wouldn't have been possible if I wouldn't have personnel in my team that has a far bigger knowledge and a larger skill set in terms of technology than I do. As said, I'm a reporter. And to pick up your question, Philip, that you posed in the beginning, yes, I do think reporters should code. If you would ask me if I can code, I'd say no, but I'm probably, and I hope, the last dinosaur. I think, especially when it comes to teaching journalism, young journalists should at least know how to manipulate code. As said, I'm the lucky one. I may lead a team. I may get people on board and hopefully attract them to stay with me and actually work on those technical stories that are important for the technical community, but also, and this is what I strongly believe, and very strongly believe, for the broader public. So this is what I do for a living. That's my bread and butter job. My spare time, I spend with journalismfund.eu. I recently got announced chairwoman, and I'm very proud to head this operation because Journalism Fund actually sponsors such projects that don't get the backing of traditional newsroom may have the opportunity to apply to Journalism Fund and get money to actually get the story out there. So I highly encourage you, please apply. We are there for you, but we need you to apply and get the story out there. As said before, I lead a team. I'm the lucky person that doesn't have to have all the skills that are needed to do proper data and document-driven journalism. I strongly believe it's about teamwork. When I talk about teamwork, that means I try to combine those persons within a team that have different skill sets. So there might be the very good reporter in terms of writing, in terms of doing radio features, in terms of doing TV features, but there is also the one or the two persons that have a very high knowledge of technological skills to actually handle data dumps as such of hacking team when the data dump was released. The problem is when you get those people together, this is not a homogeneous group of traditional reporters that you used to have in a traditional newsroom. And that's why I think communication is necessary to actually bridge that gap between skills, journalistic skills, cultural ideas, ethical standards maybe even. And that's why I say communication is key, especially in the beginning. When you set out on your common endeavor, you have to talk to each other. There are several tools that can help you to do the communication, but in the end, it's about talking with each other. That's the one thing. In terms of very sensible investigations, and we take a second step, we have to sort of secure our communication within the team, but also with the external source or the external sources. And that's why I put together a small list of tools that are available cost-free. And Claudio, you're very welcome to scream if I'm getting it wrong. I chose those tools deliberately because they're usually, most of them are available for free, and it's easy to use tools for journalists, right? It's sort of secure communication for dummies. This is how I started off, right, as a reporter within a newsroom. I didn't have a Claudio, I didn't have a Timo, I didn't have a Thomas, these are my team members. But I was there out in the field by myself. So I learned to love Stack Overflow, for example. I learned how to actually look up do proper searches on Google as well. And it's all about, as said, securing the communication with your external partners, but also internally. And to be most secure, it's about to meet your source, talk to your source directly. To do so, start off writing letters even maybe. And all others tools that I give you in hand are examples of digital tools. So, for example, do not use WhatsApp, but rather choose Signal and Threema. Both are two Swiss applications, and we are very proud of that, of course, as Swiss people. Same accounts for phone calls. There are possibilities to sort of secure your chats, of course, your emails using PGP, so on and so forth. So this might be, for some of you, this is already daily business. Believe me, in a traditional newsroom, even with very experienced and investigative reporters, it is not. So that is when it comes to talking to your source. always keep on talking with your team, and that actually means really stand up, have daily stand-ups, do have a longer weekly meeting, take time off your reporting to actually exchange ideas. This will foster the atmosphere within a team of very different people. It shouldn't be the reporter on the one hand side, and on the other hand side there is the technological staff. It is most rewarding if you combine forces, if you join forces, and to do so, especially in the beginning, do sit down and exchange ideas. And of course, take the fear off from everyone that you might look stupid, right? Me sitting next to you, Claudio, talking about this, fear is huge to look stupid, I'll tell you that. But it's okay, right? That's the strong power of communication, being honest with each other, which is quite hard in the beginning and needs some tackling. Now, after I think 5 years that I'm doing this and having improved and learned a lot, I still have days like this, where I come to the newsroom or I'm in the newsroom, and this is me literally. I like to kill you sometimes. I can't, I know, because I need you, but yeah. And of course, there are the good days, and there I'm happy, of course. This is especially then when things work out, when you get rewarded, when you're faster. We were the first ones, for example, to discover the Swiss lead in the hacking teams. This is me then celebrating. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Silke. Thank you, everybody, for your contribution. I think that what comes out clearly from your presentations today, it's how huge, how diverse is the space where hackers and journalists can really work together, both in building stuff and both in understanding what's going on, how Claudio was saying. We still have 30 minutes to this panel, so I will open up the discussion among us with some questions with you guys, starting from what you discussed here today, and I would like to start with you, Basil. And there are 2 points from your presentation that really got my attention. And the first one, I'm interested to know whether the BBC News Lab is working proactively in providing solutions to the BBC journalists, or whether it's mainly on the other side, like journalists coming to you saying, we need an application to do this, we need a project to fulfill this this idea we are working on. How does that exchange of ideas works on the daily routine? And as a second point, if you would like to tell us more about the Moulinet project, sorry about my French, and I'm wondering whether having people like you in the newsroom who are able to build up stuff could be also a sign of more independence for the newsrooms for commercial tools. Why maybe newsrooms don't really need Google Maps to do this stuff. They can build something, as you were mentioning. So let us know what you think.
So we're actively trying not to be proactive in solving business as usual problems, if that makes a little sense. So we're trying, so we have departments, we have production services, we have platform people, we have data journalism team, we have a lot of people. BBC is like 10,000 people, plus all the helping staff. So we've got a lot of people taking care of many problems, many daily problems. And we try not to get stuck in too much with the daily business of that big organization. That said, we do have a lot of people, because the family is extending itself by that system of people coming on Hochu and attachment. We have more and more people coming to us with a special need or a special request that is likely to be fulfilled if we do it, because we're going to be quicker, just because we're simpler, we're a smaller team, we're simpler, we are more agile or nimble, let's say, not to use agile. The Twitter archive idea that every newsroom is doing, mostly led by the Sun Foundation. I was contacted by a guy from user-generated content who was tracking alleged British jihadis who were going to Syria, and he said, these people are changing accounts all the time. I need to be able to build that graph of the different Twitter accounts, and I need to have the proof that these people said that. And I thought about it. I talked to it at a pub with a friend of mine who works in BBC Westminster, politics side of things. Said we could use something like that as well. So I get on, and I just did it. So that was something that was asked us. Somebody came with an idea, and we were able to deliver in quite a short period of time. That, to take me to your second question, the MultiNet thing with different way of building map. That's an idea I had. I had to do it for Airwars. So one of my side projects came feeding my work at the BBC. So we needed these maps, but the problem I was facing was that I am fairly technical, but the people who work for Airwars, most of them are not. And one of our field reporter is in Baghdad, where he has no access to more than an old computer. So we needed to find a workflow that would suit everybody and that would allow this guy in Baghdad to edit the data directly without having to give me a call and say, oh, can you re-download the whole map and convert it to JSON, then GeoJSON again. That workflow was not working. And when I talked to it to Visual Journalism, which is the sort of data journalism, all things unit at the BBC, they said, yeah, we have a similar problem. We work with shapefiles. They weigh incredible, they are extremely heavy, and that's a lot of money that goes into version control and backups. And also, our journalists can't use GIS. So what we end up doing is just reloading the map every 10 minutes and rebuilding a shapefile. We might be able to find a different solution to that. So that project was an initiative that was fed in by one of my side projects, and for the same case for all my colleagues. Now, to answer your second question about does it bring more independence to be able to build in-house solutions, if I understood correctly, I reckon there's arguments for and against, and I think you have to strike a good balance between the cost of us doing it, and that can be money, but that can also be quality, because we're an innovation department, we're doing mostly prototypes, and before they're ready for production, they need to be sent to some people who can write production code and who can pass all the InfoSec tests and all that stuff. What we have been able to do is to demonstrate a concept. We've got this idea, that prototype is working, put it in front of some people, whether they are, as I said, some journos or some audiences. And if that works, if we're happy with that product, if it works, then we can either give it away to our people or to other people who end up selling a similar commercial solution. For example, take the map thing, the MultiNet thing. If you think 2 seconds, it's fairly similar to what CartoDB does. That's exactly what they do. And they even provide a brilliant UI. You don't even need a Python script and a server to reload that. You can just have your own instance of CartoDB. Well, that's up to you. My Airwars thing was a non-profit. I don't have $150 or pounds, well, 150 something, to give every month to a subscription. I needed to do it in-house, and it needed to work with Google so we could accommodate other people. So strike that balance depending on what you need. We're using some commercial solutions quite a lot. I'm thinking about shorthand or touchcast or this sort of things to run experiments and new storytelling on the web. We could do it in-house, but somebody is doing it, and there's also a certain pride some of our execs are taking into feeding back some money into the UK business and the indies who work on this stuff. There's no point in us doing it, redoing something that already exists, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Basil. And Lyndon said from your presentation there are at least 2 takeaways that I would like to follow up. The first one is what you said about maybe competitors to journalists and news outlets right now are mobile phone games rather than other news outlets. That's a possibility that I fully agree with you on this. Do you think that having this computational and coding capability into a newsrooms could bring into these concepts and try to look out of the box and try to manage how can we really catch engagement with the readers into some different formats like news games that are not simply video, text, audio and all that. And the other concept which is crucial in this discussion, I think it's open source. And at the beginning I talk about hacking culture, but I'm wondering whether there is also an open source impact on journalism, maybe in the way sources are presented, maybe more in a transparent way. I don't know whether you want to go more in details on that. We have some noises coming here. There's an echo. I don't know whether we can close the door or something, because I don't know. Thanks.
Yeah, so I absolutely believe that news is entertainment, which is kind of, it feels worrying at first to admit that. But people do read the news to be entertained, and that is just something that we have to accept. Like, maybe we wish that it was different, but it is the case that, people are on the bus or commuting or whatever, and they want something to fill their brain with. And it might be your news article, but it's actually more likely to be some mobile game. I do think that journalism can learn a lot from tech culture, and also other people, not just programmers. I think we've gotten to a stage where getting programmers into the newsroom is like almost everyone's doing it. So it's not really that big of a deal, and I like to see like other people, like game designers, for instance, being introduced more in the newsrooms. And they don't have to be like full-time employees. It could just be contracting, like on a practical level, I mean. There's also some worries that I have that there is this sort of cargo cult worshipping of tech culture that is happening in newsrooms. Like what you said about having daily stand-ups. So I have worked in a lot of startups where stand-ups have been great. It's like you say very briefly what you did yesterday, what you're going to do today, if there's anything blocking you. And I love that. But when I was at The Guardian, we were, a team of 20 people in an open plan office with like another 200 people. And I don't know if you have noticed this, but journalists like to talk on the phone a lot. And they're not gonna stop talking on their phones when you have your stand-up. So, like my first day at The Guardian, and they had the stand-up, and I couldn't hear anything that any other person was saying. But we were still doing it, and at the end I was like asking the person next to me, did you hear anything? And they were like, no. But this had like apparently been going on for some time, and you'd be actually surprised to learn that it continued to go on for months until they realized that, oh, actually we can't really do a stand-up in the middle of 200 working journalists. Like, they're gonna be loud. So yeah, there's a lot that we can learn from tech culture, but it can't just be this blind cargo cult worship of agile methodology or whatnot. Like, there needs to be some more reason behind it. And your last question about open source, I think it comes very natural to programmers to do things open source. That's how most people got started, by viewing the JavaScript or whatever in the view source. And everyone's really open, you always share what you learn, and it's sort of built into the culture, whereas in journalism, it's kind of the opposite. Like, you're very protective of your sources, and you can't really talk to people about what you're working on, because, you don't want to get scoped. And so it's like very, very different culture, but I like the open news motto, which is basically like we can compete on stories, but not in technology. So if you make a tool that's useful, you should share it with people. We'll advance as, a society, as humans, because of it, for the greater good and all that. So yeah, I definitely want more people to publish their code. I think it might be hard to get people who don't have a programmer background, especially if they're journalists and they've like just learned how to code and they're like, oh, I don't know if my code is good enough, I don't want to put it out there. So yeah, it's a hard cultural thing to get past. So one of the things that I did when I was just starting out to code was I just made like a GitHub account with like an anonymous name. that was like not associated with my name, certainly not a female name. And I could just like publish all my code there, and I got lots of feedback and comments and, you know, contributions back, and it was great. So that's maybe a way to, yeah, get sold into how to do open source. But yeah, it's definitely something I'd like to see more of.
Thank you, Linda. And Claudio, instead, from your presentation, I see at least 2 different levels where hackers and journalists should work together and should work definitely more in the times we are living. And you were saying that journalists are specifically targeting surveillance and mass surveillance against. And I'm wondering whether you think that after the Snowden revelation there has been like a learning curve, generally speaking, among journalists on how important and fundamental is for them to protect themselves and the sources while they're working on the internet. So whether you saw really that there was a reaction and there was like a call to arms in embracing more cryptology and other stuff. And then since you also mentioned your work in with the newsrooms in like giving your technical background, technical experience in understanding the content of those files, I'm wondering whether you are satisfied of the level in which the FBI versus Apple issue, for instance, was discussed by the media, or whether we really don't get what was going on in those regards.
Okay, first question. I definitely saw an increased consciousness on the problems that they face doing that kind of work. I think that it also reflected badly in the sense of much of the Snowden revelation dealt with mass surveillance. It's pretty fact, right? It's what concerned most of the people. It's what also from a human rights perspective, it's what's more troubling. But the problem is that, from my experience at least, that it's not always necessarily the primary problem for journalists. Rather, like, and I work mostly, again, with non-Western journalists when I help them in these kinds of emergency situations, but more often than not, the way that they get targeted has nothing to do with mass surveillance, has more to do with social engineering, tricking them into doing mistakes, using, you know, malware exploits and these kinds of more targeted types of attacks. And against these, there is a problem that there isn't really a good understanding in the public of how these things function. There is a huge debate on how legitimate and not legitimate these kinds of practices are. There's a lot of confusion around it. There isn't a good training for, I mean, there's a bunch of organizations that deal with journalists and train them in using technology and being safe online, but it's very difficult to train people to be secure to the point of not, you know, protecting themselves so that they wouldn't be suffering attacks as much. It's very difficult technically to do it, and there's very little technical solutions to that problem. So in that sense, a lot more people came to me after these kinds of revelations and started getting more concerned about how can I better protect myself, even if they don't necessarily work on national security matters, but generally speaking, you know, it just not always just governments that go after journalists. It might be, you know, other corporations, you know, terrorist organizations happens also. I dealt with these kinds of situations in the past. As well as all sorts of actors. And in that case, you kind of need to train them and teach them through understanding what is the threats that they're facing and how to better react to it. Security is always kind of a trade-off between what you can achieve and what is best suited for you specifically in the context you're working under. In what country you're working, whether you're working by remote or you're traveling somewhere, what type of adversary you might expect against you, and what kind of capabilities you can expect them to employ. And so yeah, there's a better reaction and a better understanding of the problem, but we're still not there yet to be able to tackle the problem as much as we should. And regarding the second question, I have to say that I kind of followed the FBI Apple thing from a distance. I think that the reporting on the problem was relatively well done, but I attribute most of the you know, the responsibility to Apple itself, actually. I think they did a great job on explaining quite clearly to everybody why they were fighting that particular issue and why it was important for them not to give in as easily. It's still a difficult issue to understand because it's a very specific case. You know, they were requesting access for a very specific investigation on San Bernardino attacks, and that doesn't look very obviously as a problem that must concern everybody as an Apple customer, but it is. And I think Apple did a great job in explaining why. And then it kind of resolved weirdly. So like the kind of problem Apple FBI debate kind of faded away with FBI kind of finding some other solution to the problem, which might also be another reason for concern, but that we'll see evolving in the next weeks. But I think probably also kind of the effect of this Snowden revelations and talking so much as we've done in the last years about surveillance helped into this debate in railing a lot of support for Apple in that particular fight. Probably if this would have happened, I don't know, 3 years ago, it would not have resulted equally. Probably Apple would not have felt as much pressured to serve the interest of the customers. But in this case now we're at a point where there has been enough discussion that the large public kind of understand the value of privacy and the value of protecting the security of the technology that they use. And so it kind of worked out quite well, at least for now.
Thank you, Claudio. And Silke, from your experience, you talk about good days and bad days in keeping together these different animals in the newsroom. In your opinion, are these cultures, and I refer again to the hacking culture and the journalistic culture, really that difference in the way they approach work and ethics and anything else? Or is there really this real difference, or the borders are really more blurred and possibility to cooperation and do more teamwork are actually wider than we expect, maybe?
Well, it depends on, so it's not a clear yes or clear no. I've experienced a lot of lonesome wolves, reporters with a very good track record that have worked by themselves for most of their professional career, and to put them in a team with others, not necessarily technologists, but also other reporters, is quite a challenge indeed. So, as said during my talk, you need to establish a common ground. You need to gain mutual understanding for each other and develop a vision that everyone shares and carries with them during their work. That's not necessarily special to journalists, hacks and hackers. I think this accounts for all teams in various environments. But as said, I think it makes it special because all of a sudden you have a shift from that traditional reporter being out by himself to teamwork.
Thank you. And we still have a few minutes until we have to clear the room. So if anyone from the public has 1 or 2 questions, I think everybody will be more than happy to answer. There is a mic walking in the room, so raise your hands. Really no one? Yeah, we have one there. Tell us who are you addressing the question, or whether it's more a general one.
Hi, my name is George. I'm a Swiss-based journalist, and we were talking a lot about technology and journalism, and in IT we also have a lot of problems with the different speed of digitalization. And so my question is, would it be a solution to work in a kind of a bimodal system where we have young and very fast journalists and traditional journalists, so that both groups can work with their speeds?
Who wants to answer that one? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm curious to know how The Guardian was dealing with that, because their website is quite huge as well. On BBC side of things, the way we're trying to move forward towards that is to take out some of the work that repeats itself. So don't repeat yourself, just build reusable things, so that's templates, that's bits of, whether they're bits of code or other approaches to an article, so that the work you do doesn't take that long. Take the stupid stuff of hard news out. Reuse some of the older work you've done. So that's how we've been approaching it. Have you worked in some... Yes, no?
No.
Do you want to add something?
I said I think it's once you have a straight idea of what you would like to achieve, what direction you would like to go in, what topics you would like to cover, it's about getting those people with the best skill set on board, but also have the social skills to establish a team and work as a team. Again, it's not about the lonesome reporter, it's about teamwork. And I think, Basil, I'm not revealing a secret when you told me over coffee that you will get a new team member, a person that has been with the BBC for about, how many years, you said?
30 or 40, yeah?
Yeah, there you go. So it's a young team of yours, plus this very experienced reporters that all of a sudden joins you and advocates for your needs within the BBC. I think this is a very good example.
To give a bit of context, we have a new hire from last September, Rob Mackenzie.
40 years ago.
Yeah. He joined the BBC 40 years ago. He just joined one of the new teams, my team, News Labs, as the editor. And most of his role, because we don't publish that much stuff, the role is not very editorial. The role is your contacts, selling the stuff, and essentially spreading the knowledge and the good work that has been done in News Labs towards the wider organization, but doing the contrary as well, letting us know about problems we should be aware of, or some stuff we could want to get stuck in. And that came through, a guy who's made a career at the BBC and who we hired for his contact book.
If there is one more question, we still have time to discuss a little bit more. Raise your hands. Okay. No one? So, yeah, here, front row.
I guess it goes to all of you in a way. You were talking about how to attract technologists, so people with a coding background to newsrooms, and about how journalists should learn to code. So then the question for me is, vice versa, how do you teach these people with a coding background? How do you attract them, and then how do you teach them the skills a journalist needs to have? Because it's not just something you can fall into, there's also a lot of background you need to know. And how do you make these people feel comfortable and secure in journalism?
It's hard. That depends, of course, on the individual, but the first thing that you should teach your staff is media law and media ethics. Because I think you have a pretty fair comparative advantage if you know your rights. And this is something that you really just teach, lecture. And that's the very first starting point. The basic toolbox of journalism. Writing skills is a different topic. When writing is required, I would, for now, work for radio and TV, so there are different skills usually required, but really start off with the basics, and that is knowing your very own rights as a journalist. And then on the informal part, like making someone feel comfortable, there is no secret that I could reveal, but this depends on the very social relationship that you may build up or may not be able to build up.
Do you guys want to add something more? Yep. Linda?
Well, I've been one of those people who knew nothing about journalism and then came into a newsroom. But I've always been doing civic tech. Like I was working in local government, I've been working in education, and I didn't really see journalism as separate from that. I thought it was like a branch of civic tech, so I didn't really feel like I was an outsider until I came into the newsroom. And then, the journalists certainly felt that I was an outsider. And I think at first it was really quite hard to even just talk to journalists to try to get any collaboration going. And there wasn't any formal, workshops or anything that I could go to learn journalism. I don't think I was meant to maybe learn journalism, but I did put on a lot of workshops to teach reporters how to, do Excel or basic coding. And one thing that I learned was that if I put on a workshop that's called Excel for Beginners, I'm not going to get anyone to come to it because nobody wants to admit that they don't know, after having been a journalist for 20 years, that they don't know how to use Excel. The exact same course, but called refresher course in Excel, was very popular. Also, just as a side note, I don't think that journalists need to learn to code. And that might be like a bit unpopular coming from a programmer, but I do think that, journalists don't need to learn to code so that they can make, the website. But I do think that they need to know how to use a computer. And in order to use a computer, you need to do programming. Like, the computer is so good at, manipulating data and large, documents and all of these things. You could save so much time if you just, used the command line. So I think that some of that conversation should definitely shift, stop teaching journalists how to make a graph on the website and instead teach them how to use a computer for what a computer is good at to do their journalism better and more efficiently. And if anyone has any ideas of how I should learn journalism, tell me.
I think we can close here for right now. Thank you, Basil. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Silke. Thank you, Claudio. Thank all of you for attending this interesting conversation. Enjoy the festival. Take care.